head rändehuvilised ja eksperdid, hea asekantsler, hea rektor, head ettekandjad.
Honorable
Tere tulemast
Undersecretary, Rector,
Eestisse, Tallinnasse,
members of
Maarjamäele,
the audience. Welcome to
Sisekaitseakadeemiasse.
Estonia, welcome to
Minu nimi
Maarjamäe,
on
to
Martin
the Estonian
Martinson
Academy of
ja olen
Security
tänase sündmuse
Sciences.
moderaatori
My name is
auväärt
Martin
rollis.
Martinson and I'm the
Mul on
moderator
väga hea
for
meel tervitada
today.
teid
I'm
sel
honorable
veidike
to be
vihmasel
the moderator.
sügispäeval Euroopa
I'm happy to
rändevõrgustiku
welcome
Eesti
you on this
kontaktpunkti
rainy day
konverentsil
at this European
Kodakondsus ja ränne
Migration
täna ja
Network
homme.
conference
Nagu
titled
praegusele ajastule
Citizenship
kohane,
and Migration today
toimub
and
ka meie
tomorrow.
konverents natukene erilisemalt,
Like it has been happening
samaaegselt
the
nii
recent times, our
veebiavarustes
conference
kui
is
ka
a
ohutusnõudeid
bit
järgides
special as well, so
Sisekaitseakadeemia
it takes
Tallinna
place
õppekeskuses, kus
both
meil on vahepeal
online and also
hõlpsalt
on
osalemas
site at the
väiksem
Estonian
konsortgrupp
Academy of
esinejaid
Security
osalejaid.
Sciences, where we have a
Head
small
veebivahendusel
group of people
osalejad.
already also
Konverentsi
present in
kantakse üle
person.
kahe
The
erineva
conference is also
livestreami
broadcast
kaudu.
over a
Ühes
live
neist on
stream.
võimalik jälgida ettekandeid originaalkeeles.
There is a live stream for the original version of the presentations, and the other web stream is in English.
This conference will be broadcasted through two different live streams. If you do not yet understand Estonian, then the chances are that the conference will make much more sense to you if you follow us through the English live stream link. This will guarantee that you can enjoy the results of the hard work that is being done by our interpreters, who are translating everything into English for you.
Our conference will today last to around 2:30, and it consists of 3 panels and 2 breaks in between the panels. In panel 1, we take an international look at the acquisition of citizenship in EU member states. Panel 2 will focus on the choices in Estonian migration policy, looking at the past, the future and the present. And in the final panel, you will hear a lot of interesting information about the annual report of Estonia's migration and citizenship policy. The participants of the conference can also ask written questions from the speakers. You can do it online at www.slido.com. So please post your questions there by using the hashtag citizenship. Please submit your questions in the written form also when you are present on site in person at the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences. And before I give the floor over to Mr. Undersecretary for Internal Security, Migration and Public Order and to the Rector, let me tell you a bit about the Estonian contact point of European Migration Network. The network is a research and information exchange network funded by the European Commission, consisting of the national contact points and affiliated organizations that the contact points work with. Starting from 2020, the Estonian contact point for the European Migration Network is at the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences in the Internal Security Institute. For those who have not heard about the European Migration Network, you can also subscribe to our informative newsletter, and you can take a look at the Migration Network at the webpage www.emn.ee. So I shall use no more of your time. I wish you all a fruitful conference, and I will hand the floor now over to the Undersecretary for Internal Security, Migration and Public Order at the Ministry of Interior, Mr. Veiko Kommusaar. Dear participants, dear collaboration partners, dear colleagues, welcome to the conference. I am happy to welcome you and to introduce today where we are focusing on the choices of the citizenship policy.
Demokraatlike riikide kõrgemaks riigivõimuks
The highest holder of power in democratic countries
Kodakondsus ei ole
is
seejuures
the
pelgalt
people.
side riigi ja inimese vahel,
So it is not only a liaison between the state and the people, but it also forms an important part of our identity. I would hereby like to remind you and stress that without the citizens, a state cannot function as well. And the organization of life of a person depends on a person's right to live in a country, in a particular state, be it the opportunity to work, to study, or to be with your kith and kin. And people's choices of where to live in depend on the security that the state offers and also how attractive the state is and how much a person can realize themselves. Nevertheless, there are always factors that we cannot predict beforehand. Among them is also the spread of the coronavirus and stopping the spread of the coronavirus that has had a major impact on migration in many states. We have to learn from that, and we have to be better prepared for situations like that in the future. No doubt, the informed direction of the migration pathways is vital. And we also know that we have to bear in mind all the factors that influence a person's way of life. We have to carefully consider these factors. We have to discuss what is citizenship and how difficult is it to acquire citizenship. We have to see whether a state has done enough so that a state's citizenship can be achieved. The other thing is that the person would have to really perceive the need to obtain citizenship. Each citizen has to really be internally proud of being a citizen of a particular state. So in Estonia, we have really strived towards making sure that more and more people can have the opportunity to really connect with the state of Estonia in the citizenship perspective as well. The citizenship policy that we have had over the last years has reduced the number of stateless people among children, giving a child that is born in Estonia citizenship right after they are born. We have also signed the citizenship agreement with people so that a person applying for citizenship takes on certain obligations, and the state, on the other hand, will pay for language studies and will also remunerate some days off from work needed to prepare for the citizenship exam. We must also make sure that nobody hurts the state or a citizen in terms of acquiring citizenship. And the Parliament has held negotiations over naturalization processes, for example, when a person has committed a serious crime against the state. And in terms of the general principles of migration and asylum, there is the new EU Pact on Migration and Asylum. All EU member states have to agree on the principles. We can see a lot of progress that has been made on migration pathways, direction and management. For example, we know now that we need to strengthen the protection of the external borders. We also need to enable the border guard to return the people on the border, and we also know how important it is to deal with the matters in the country of origin. There is also the solidarity principle, and in the future we think that the member states should provide solidarity in as effective way as possible. I would like to thank the European Migration Network and the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences that continue to be irreplaceable partners for us and have also facilitated today's conference. I would like to wish a lot of good and progressive thoughts for all the participants of the conference, and let us all work on valuing citizenship, and let us make sure that migration guarantees both the rights of the state, of the society, and of a citizen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much to the Undersecretary. And another important person will now make a welcome statement. Mr. Marek Link, Director for the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences. The floor is yours. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, guests, dear Undersecretary, Honorable Undersecretary. We are holding this conference at quite a significant time. I have seen many schools and authorities really doubting about how to behave in this crisis, in this pandemic. Should we cancel everything, put everything on hold, or find smart opportunities for being together? People tend to survive, tend to be creative, and I'm very happy that this conference is taking place, because why should we let the virus win? On the other hand, the Estonian contact point of the Estonian migration network should also be congratulated, because this is a contact point that has been traveling extensively around Estonia as well, and now I can say, welcome home. You were in our building before, now you are back here, and it is a wonderful home that you have. And I think that you are in the middle of the most modern learning environment of an European Academy of Security Sciences. When you look outside, look at the weather, you can see that it is the peak season of migration. Thousands of birds are leaving Estonia to spend the winter in a warm country. And if we could do like they are doing, we should probably go as well. But in the current times, we can all see and feel what happens when one of the fundamental rights that we have is limited for some reason. What does it feel like? Everybody would like to travel freely, move around freely, but we can well understand why is this the case, that things are like they are. Today, and like it is with all crises, it can be said that something good is the result of each crisis. But this crisis has also brought around a new term, which is called the new normality. The new normality does not appear out of nowhere. It has to be created. I sincerely hope that when we learn to live in this new normality, we shall not have the old mentality, so that we would still create a society that unites people, not separates people, focuses on what unites people, not on the differences. We should move forward together, and today's conference also talks about migration and citizenship today and tomorrow. Thoughts are free in this environment, and the most important element here is to really dare to think critically and constructively. And once the ideas have been exchanged in the form of words, I really wish that these words turn into action one day as well. I wish you a lot of ideas. Do talk, do ask questions, be present both here and online. And once again, congratulations to the Migration Network. I can see that you are definitely present here with us with this conference. That is one of the key events in the year. So I wish you a lot of success, good luck, and have a fruitful conference. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for these encouraging, welcoming statements. Like I briefly mentioned beforehand, then the first session or the panel of today has a very international taste to it. So you can hear about the EU citizenship, both in the EU and also as an example from Ireland. And you can also hear about what is the impact of Brexit on the value of British citizenship. And I'm delighted to now introduce Norma Rose to you to make the first presentation. And she has been nominated as the senior consultant at ICF by the European Commission. She has been focusing on asylum and migration policy, solidarity within the EU, on the legislative acts of the second generation of EU migration, and on the highly qualified labor force migrating to the EU.
In your case, the live stream is yours, at least for the next 15 to 20 minutes.
Many thanks. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and present to you the key findings of an Yemen study that was recently published in summer, where we looked into the pathways to citizenships for third-country nationals in the EU, and we summarize and compare the policies in place in the EU member states and the UK. If you're looking for more detailed information on specific member states, I'd just like to point out that we do have many national reports available on the Yemen website, because today I will just be presenting the overview and the comparative overview of what's happening at the across the EU. So just to let you know what I'll be talking about today, I will start with a brief introduction on the aim and the scope of the study, just so you're aware. Then I will look into the legal and policy overview related to the acquisition of citizenship across the EU. Then I will explain a bit what conditions and requirements need to be fulfilled for third-country nationals to acquire citizenship in EU member states. We will also look into some procedural aspects and also cover the topic of dual citizenship briefly, as well as the link between citizenship and integration. So we really aim to provide a comparative overview of the frameworks in place across the EU member states for new migrants from third countries. What we mean with new migrants in this context is first-generation migrants, so not second or third-generation ones that don't have any pre-existing ties with the member state in question. And we look in particular at naturalization, at ordinary naturalization, which is the common procedure in order to gain citizenship for third-country nationals. So in total, we cover 25 member states, including the UK. So for the purpose of the study, the UK was still considered a member state at the time of the development of this report. And we cover a 5-year period from 2014 to 2019, although we do also briefly look into the impact of COVID-19, as that was very timely and relevant at the time of publication, and is of course still very relevant now. So just to give you a bit of a brief legal and policy overview related to the acquisition of citizenship. So citizenship is largely a matter of national law. There's not relates to citizenship, but of course the aspect of EU citizenship cannot be ignored, which is why member states must have due regard to EU law, because once you get the citizenship of a member state, that means that you automatically are also conferred EU citizenship, meaning that the person is entitled to free movement and other rights that come along with it. We found that around 40 member states actually underwent major changes in their national laws and policies in the last 5 years. And it's interesting to know that we noted 2 different approaches there. Some member states took a more liberal approach, meaning that they loosened the requirements in place to attain citizenship for third-country nationals, sometimes because they want to ensure that they are better integrated, or because of historical considerations or special ties that they want to acknowledge. Other member states have put in place a bit more restrictive measures. Also there they aimed sometimes at ensuring actually better integration. So they wanted to make sure that once a third-country national becomes a citizenship, he or she is really fully integrated. Or others did it out of concerns for public security, for instance. We also wanted to present briefly a few statistics that are available on Eurostat actually, regarding the conferral of citizenship. So we found that in 2018, which is the latest available data, 656,000 third country nationals were granted the citizenship of an EU member state. As you can see on the graph, this is fairly, this is fairly, well, there are not many fluctuations, and in total, 79% were actually total. 79% of all citizenship acquisitions were done via third country nationals, actually, and not EU, and the rest was done by EU citizens. So in terms of the main countries of origin, we found that according to Eurostat data, Moroccans actually constituted the largest share of nationals.
So, sorry, Norma, just to interrupt, just making sure, are you showing any slides? Because we can't see anything, so just in case you thought that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I thought I had shared my screen, but apparently it didn't work. I'm very sorry. It should work now, hopefully.
Yep, if you can make it full screen view, then it would be perfect.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see. Can you put it in full screen?
It is in full screen on my screen, but apparently, sorry, I thought
that's okay.
It worked.
But we can see them, so you can just carry on as you would.
Okay, wait. Let me try again. Is that okay?
Yes,
yeah?
You can go on. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So yes, in terms of the top countries of origin, as I mentioned, Moroccans on an EU, looking at the EU perspective, were the largest share of former nationals. Followed by Albanians and Turkish citizenships. But here it's really important to note that the former citizenships actually varied significantly across member states. So for instance, in Latvia, actually US nationals were the second largest group of people that obtained citizenship, whereas in Sweden, for instance, those were Syrians and Somalians. So what you can see on the map here is really the EU level average. What kind of rights and duties come with the conferral of citizenship? Those are actually quite common across all the EU. So among the most common rights is the right to vote, of course, to stand for elections for public office, to access certain professions and social rights, and to get consular assistance when you're abroad. There are also some duties that come along with it. For instance, in those member states where there's an obligation to vote, you are then also obliged to vote. There's military service that you might need to participate in, or the judicial system. But this, of course, also depends on the member state in question. So as I mentioned, we are really looking into ordinary naturalization in this study specifically. So there are different modes of acquiring citizenship, but we are really looking into ordinary naturalization, meaning that certain conditions have to be fulfilled in order for a third country national to obtain that citizenship. And we'll look into those a bit more in the next couple of slides. Special naturalization is also possible in some member states, or actually in most member states, on certain grounds. For instance, when you're a child to a national, of course, or if there's a link through cultural heritage or marriage statelessness, etc. So, but we really don't cover that in a lot of detail in the study. To acquire citizenship through ordinary naturalization, various requirements have to be fulfilled. First and most importantly, the third country national has to have a minimum period of residence in the member state in question. And that the duration of that period varies quite significantly between member states, from as little as 3 years in some to 10 years in others. But the average, I would say, is around 5 years. Although a short period of absences are usually permitted in member states, although here also the duration varies. And those absences are usually for holidays or family visits, of course. In order to be recognized as a period of residence, you have to be actually registered in the country of application. And that period is usually based on effective residence. So you have to be physically present on the territory. This is the case in most member states. There are some that don't require this, but most of them do say that you need to be actually in the country in order for it to count towards your minimum period of residence. And in order to prove that, you have to have a valid legal residence status for that member state. Temporary residence permits are also often permitted in all but actually 8 member states, but also refugee status or subsidiary protection status usually counts towards that minimum period of residence. So to prove that legal residence criteria has been met, member states accept a variety of different documents. Most commonly, having an entry in official registers of the member state is accepted as proof, but also employment contracts, for instance, or tax records count in some member states that you can see on the slide, or even rental contracts, for instance. So there's a variety of different documents that third-country nationals can submit in order to prove that they have been residing in that member state. Another very important criteria is language, of course. So this is actually a legal official requirement in 22 member states, but also here some exemptions apply. And in Cyprus, Ireland, and Sweden, there's actually no official requirement in terms of language. The level of knowledge required actually varies quite significantly. There are some, for instance, Bulgaria, where only a elementary knowledge of the language is required, whereas in others, such as a B1 level is actually needed. And to prove that, a language certificate is usually accepted as proof, although some member states do carry out personal interviews to prove the knowledge of language. Or in 6 member states actually require the applicants to take a specific language test just for the purpose of that citizenship application. Another important requirement in 13 member states is a citizenship or integration test that applicants have to take, which is usually done in writing or via interviews. And there are also other conditions that apply. The applicant usually has to prove a good conduct in general, and adhering to public order requirements, for instance, proof by an absence of a criminal record, payment of taxes and debts, and so on. But these differ quite substantially between member states. Applicants also have to commit to certain values, legally or symbolically, in 15 member states, or do a pledge of formal allegiance in 60 member states. Also, the economic or financial situation is often taken into account when when applying for citizenship, which is the case in 14 member states. So in terms of the procedure, how do you apply for citizenship? So all in all, we noted that there are some member states that take a rather horizontal approach, whereby one main authority is responsible for processing the application, versus those member states who follow more of a bottom-up approach, where the application is passed from one level, so usually from the local level up to the top level. Ultimately ending with the head of state or government, actually. So for the submission, mostly the local authorities are involved. They accept the application and often also check them for completeness and validity. And then the decision making, it depends a bit on the member state, but various ministries, for instance, the Ministry of Interior or Justice, are involved. And then the final decision is usually taken by the president, actually, or the responsible minister, prime minister. An appeal is not always possible, which is actually quite interesting. So in the end, it's really still up to the member state to decide whether or not an applicant is to become a citizen. In Belgium and Germany, this is different. There, the applicant has the right to be naturalized if all legal requirements are fulfilled. And in some member states, you have to undergo a citizenship ceremony on oath of allegiance to close the process. In terms of accessibility, we found that only 5 member states actually currently use a digitized procedure or allow online applications to be made for citizenship, although 6 member states are currently working towards that, and we expect that due to COVID, of course, more member states might go down that route. The time period for processing applications is actually varies quite substantially between member states. So it can be as little as 6 months in a member state, or up to 48 months, which is the case in Italy, for example. Also, the cost of applying for citizenship differs quite substantially. In some member states, there are no fees to lodge the application as such, whereas in others, this can be up to 1,500 euros, actually. So there are a variety of different documents that are required for naturalization. For instance, most commonly, of course, you have to provide an ID or travel document to prove your identity. Many member states ask for a birth certificate or a proof of legal residence, for instance. There are also other documents that are needed, depending, for instance, if there's a language requirement or a citizenship test needed. But also some member states even require a CV of the applicant. So briefly talking about the measures adopted in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, at the time of writing, which was May, June, of course, the situation was a bit different maybe than now in some member states. But back then, 40 member states actually did not take any specific measures to respond to the impact of the pandemic, although most of them did note that the application procedure was delayed quite significantly, or some did not accept new applications, but only processed existing ones, for instance. And also the appeal proceedings for citizenship applications were halted or cancelled in some member states, or others moved to online processes. In terms of dual citizenship, this is quite an interesting topic, because here also member states quite differed in their approach, although 70 member states do, so the majority do allow dual citizenship. To acknowledge, for instance, that the third country national still remains connected to the home country, even though he or she then gets the citizenship of an EU member state. And those countries that don't allow dual citizenship, such as Austria or Germany, they argue that in order to be fully integrated and acknowledge that the new link with the member state, the citizenship should be given up. But it should be noted that here quite a lot of exceptions actually apply. So dual citizenship is still possible for certain individuals, and it's really not the norm that there's no possibility at all to have dual citizenship in those member states. But some member states also noted challenges that come along with allowing dual citizenship. For instance, in Finland noted that there are national security issues, or Greece also said that having 2 passports often enables the holders to evade national security checks or authority checks, which can be a problem for the member state. In terms of citizenship and integration, there are also 2 different approaches generally that are followed by the member states. There's that group of member states that really see citizenship as a combination of the integration process, so basically the end of the road for a third country national. And then there's those member states that see citizenship as part of the integration process. So even though you get the citizenship, that does not mean that you're fully integrated, but it's just an important step towards that. But you can find some more details about this whole discussion also in the synthesis report. And we found that actually it's quite an interesting discussion going on at the national level in some member states about this. But we found that also citizenship, unfortunately, is no guarantee against discrimination in the labor market, for instance. Although the labor market opportunities of citizens are usually higher than for third country nationals, there's still no guarantee. against discrimination, as a survey by the Fundamental Rights Agency found. So in terms of the conclusions and lessons learned, well, just to summarize, citizenship is really the legal bond between an individual and their state. And there has been quite an evolution of national policies at the national level, although we really found that there seems to be a very lively debate also at national level as to whether the citizenship process should be facilitated or made more difficult to access, and so on. In general, the procedures are quite harmonized across member states, so the most common steps are very similar, but of course there are a variety of specific conditions apply, and the access to citizenship is much easier in some member states than in others. Dual citizenship is the main principle across the EU, although here as well there are some outliers. And yes, as I mentioned, there's this dichotomy of seeing citizenship as an outcome of integration rather than a driver for better integration. So that was all from my side. If you're interested in having a look at the synthesis report, where you can find a lot more details about what I've just been talking about, please do have a look at our website of the EMN, and do follow us on Twitter as well for any updates on the EMN's work. Many thanks.
There is applause in the hall for you, in case you can't hear. I'm just telling you that it was well received. Thank you very much. But we do have also one question for you from the audience.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
Yes, of course.
The question is, does any member state reported that they are planning some legislative changes to strengthen their citizenship policy? And if yes, why?
Yes, so as I mentioned, there are, this is really subject of ongoing debate in all member states, or in most member states. We didn't really look so much into the future, I must admit, in this study. So we focused on what member states did in the past 5 years. But from what we could see, there are some debates. For instance, I remember in Sweden there's an ongoing debate about the language requirement, because Sweden no longer, for some years now, no longer requires an applicant to fulfill a certain language requirement. But there's actually debate about whether that's sensible or whether that maybe should be changed back. So that's just one example where there might be a change in legislation in the future, or a change in policy. That would be my answer. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Norma. Enne kui me liigume edasi meie järgmise ettekandja juurde, on sobilik vaadata lühikest 3-minutilist videot, mis haakub nii Norma ettekandega kui ka järgneva ettekandega. Vaatame seda videot siis nüüd koos.
Many of them moved to Europe permanently and after some time decide to apply for citizenship of their host state. In 2018, some 656,000 third country nationals were granted the citizenship of an EU member state. Usually citizenship is acquired through birth, either passed on from parents, jus sanguinis, or by birth on the country's territory, jus soli. Another way to acquire citizenship is through application. This is known as naturalization. All member states offer the possibility to naturalization, but the rules differ across countries. To find out about these criteria, a new EMN study compared naturalization schemes across EU member states. The study found that all member states require a minimum period of legal residence and good conduct and public order. Most also require knowledge of the host country's language. In half of the member states, applicants also have to pass a citizenship or integration test. Some countries also review the applicant's economic situation and expect legal or symbolic commitment to certain values. Citizenship entails rights as well as duties. Rights in member states may include voting, standing for parliamentary election, access to certain professions, more preferable conditions for social security. Duties may include compulsory military service, participation in the judicial system, participating or assisting in national defence. Many migrants stay connected to their country of origin even after receiving the citizenship of their host countries. Therefore, they may wish to keep their former citizenship as well. In over half of the member states in the study, dual citizenship is possible. Studies have shown that naturalised immigrants in general tend to be better integrated than non-nationals. Views on the relationship between citizenship and integration, however, vary across member states. In some, citizenship is seen as the culmination of the integration process, while in others, it is seen as a way to facilitate the integration of migrants into the host society. A total of 25 European countries conducted a study on their pathways to citizenship for third country nationals. These studies are summarised in the EU Synthesis Report. If you want to know more, check out the full report at the EMN website.
Oleks üsna imelik rääkida rände- ja kodakondsuspoliitikast ilma naabreid kaasamata ja neid ära kuulamata. Meie järgmine ettekandja ühineb meiega Läänemere põhjakaldalt Soomest. Tuukka Lampi on Soome Migratsiooniameti ja sealse rändevõrgustiku kontaktpunkti vanem analüütik. Tuukka on oma varasemas tööelus töötanud muuhulgas ka rahvusvahelises migratsiooniorganisatsioonis ning Soome suursaatkonnas New Delhis. Good morning, Tuukka. Good morning, Helsinki. I am surrendering the live stream to you now for the next 15 to 20 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And if you want to share your slides, then please share the screen as well.
Excellent, I will do that. Thank you, EMN Estonia, for having me in your conference. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you also, Norma, for your presentation on the EMN synthesis report. And I will now zoom in a bit and go through some of the findings of the Finnish national report on the EMN study on pathways to citizenship. I'll go first for a quick overview on citizenship in Finland, and then move on to some of the key requirements for naturalization in a bit more detail, and then I will conclude with some findings regarding citizenship and integration. Now, let me just find this slides, and can you see my slides?
We sure can.
Excellent. All right. So let me get right to it then. First of all, I've listed some of the rights that Finnish citizenship entails. So first of all, these are very similar to many of the other member states. As you can see, there's right to the Finnish passport. There is the right to refuse extradition to another country, but you also right to enter Finland at any time, and right for any political activity such as presidential elections, parliamentary elections, and referendums after turning 18. Right to vote. Interestingly enough, though, third country residents in Finland do have the right to vote in municipal elections, so they do still have some political agency on local level. And then there's the right to stand to parliamentary election as well, and also possibility to be appointed to public offices, to some public offices. And I will get back to that in a bit later in my presentation. And as well as, of course, you have all the rights of an EU citizen, freedom of movement, employment in the EU, etc., as well as the right to vote and become a candidate in EU elections. So like I said, very similar to many other member states. Finnish citizenship also comes with some obligations, mainly the obligation to participate in national defense. This mainly applies for males, or this applies for male citizens over the age of 18 who have to join military service. As well as there's the obligation to comply with Finnish laws in and outside of Finland as well. A Finnish citizen can be actually convicted in Finland or out for a crime committed abroad. I myself, for example, when I was working at the nationality unit, had one case where a person was actually refused citizenship because he had committed a serious crime abroad. So it can happen. Here's a quick statistical overview of citizenship applications. And the blue line on top shows the applications and the amount of applications. So as you can see, it has, for the last 5 years, remained fairly stable, around 12,000 to 13,000. Last year, 2019, we saw a slight uptick to 13,300. And we can expect probably the amount of citizenship applications to rise in the near future, because many of the asylum seekers who arrived in Europe and Finland in 2014, 2015 now have stayed in Finland for the minimum period of residence. So many of them are certainly interested in applying for citizenship now. So like I said, there's a slight prediction in the future that we can expect some more applications to come. Then in the middle, the green line is, or the turquoise line is persons granted Finnish citizenship. And as you can see, that has also been fairly stable, with the, save for the slight increase or slight peak in 2017. From our information, those were mainly Russian, Estonian, and Somali citizens who applied for citizenship, who were mostly granted citizenship at that time. And personally, I couldn't find any further explanation why the big increase, but ever since it also has stayed close to, in the neighborhood of 10,000. And then the red line shows the amount of negative decisions, which has also been fluctuating between 1,500 and 2,500. Top 5 nationalities. There's a slight difference between applicants and people who actually are granted citizenship. So number 1 on both cases is still Russia, since, for obvious reasons, since it's the neighboring country and a lot of cross-border traffic. And number 2 in people who apply are Iraqi citizens, but then people who are people who are granted citizenship are actually Estonians. If I remember correctly, Estonians have had so far approximately a 95-96% approval rate. So many apply and many are also granted. It's a fairly straightforward process. And then one interesting point of note on the top 5 applicants is Syrian citizens from last year. Since earlier they were not so many, but in 2019 we started already seeing the phenomenon that I mentioned before, that many Syrians, for example, who had come to Finland had now stayed for at least 4 years. So we saw an increase in Syrian citizens applying Finnish citizenship. Here is another statistical chart on the positive and negative decisions, mainly showing also the percentages. And you can see that the ratio of positive and negative decisions has remained fairly stable throughout the last years, and on average 85% positive, 15% negative, with slight increases plus and minus. Move on to some of the legal context. On an international level, Finland is party to the 1961 UN Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, which essentially means that Finland has signed into law many caveats to prevent people from remaining stateless in Finland. And then, of course, Finland is party to the 97 European Convention on Nationality. And then on the national level, there are main legal instruments regulating citizenship is the Finnish Constitution, which mentions or which states that Finnish citizenship is mainly passed through birth, and then further stipulations are laid down in the Nationality Act of Finland. And then there's the Nationality Act itself, which is the main document for anybody dealing with citizenship. It lays down all the ground rules and all the requirements for granting citizenship and the eligibility. And then finally, there's the government decree on nationality, which basically lays down in more detail the different responsibilities of different authorities that have to deal with citizenship applications or granting citizenship. Then there are a bunch of other acts which are also relevant to citizenship. For example, there's the Administrative Procedure Act, which essentially lays down the rules on good governance and how the application process in general is supposed to be handled. Then there's the Aliens Act, which lays down, of course, has the list of ground rules on legal residence of aliens. And then there's the Passport Act, which basically just states how a passport, under which circumstances a passport is granted or not granted. In recent years, there have not been very many legislative amendments to the Nationality Act or any acts referring to nationality or citizenship. But I've listed the three main ones from which came into effect last year. First, in April, beginning of April, there was the amendment came into effect the Amendment to Maternity Act, which facilitated female same-sex couples to pass Finnish citizenship to their children. This essentially meant that a female same-sex couple there was the mother who gave birth to the child, and then there's the other mother who then, if the other mother then happened to be a Finnish citizen, then they could also pass on their citizenship now to their children without the need for internal adoption, which was earlier the case. And so it facilitated the process for them. Then there was the amendment to the Nationality Act, which gave the possibility to revoke citizenship or remove citizenship based on certain crime for people who are sentenced to certain crimes, such as these are severe crimes such as terrorism, treason, etc. But this, of course, with the caveat that a person had ties to another country or citizenship from another country. So Finland still, even though Finland can now, the Finnish government can actually strip a person from their Finnish citizenship, they cannot make a person stateless still. And then in July 2019, there was the amendment placing restrictions on dual citizens being appointed to some higher military and border guard posts. And these were it also posed restrictions on some of the trainings for higher office or military and border guard academy. I'll get to that in a bit again. The amendments to legislation that I mentioned just now many of them have come from how citizenship has been handled lately in public discussions. Public debate in recent years generally has revolved around national security and crime control. I listed three main things where citizenship was lately mentioned. First of all, there was dual citizens in public office, like I mentioned. There have been concerns that people in higher offices, military offices, for example, might be subject to foreign influence. So therefore, there was a whole debate regarding whether people in those offices should be, if they are dual citizens, whether they should be granted. And it eventually led to the change in the law. And then in late 2018, there was a case of sexual crimes that were sexual assaults and rapes that were found out in the northern city of Oulu. And that prompted a discussion and some of the suspects were actually people of asylum seeker background who had recently been granted citizenship, if I remember correctly. And because of that, that prompted a discussion regarding whether some of the rules on citizenship should be tightened. And then losing citizenship due to criminal activity. This came in the aftermath of the events of 2015 European migration, of the arrival of many asylum seekers to Europe. This came in the aftermath where the Finnish government also was concerned with matters of international terrorism, and it was also connected to the dual citizenship debate. And essentially this also eventually led to the whole amendment to nationality law, where person can be actually now revoked of their citizenship or stripped of their citizenship in certain cases. So then how does one get Finnish citizenship? As I mentioned, it's laid down in the Nationality Act, and mostly it observes the principle of jus sanguinis, which means citizenship by birth. So I've listed here the Section 9 of the Nationality Act, which just lists that firstly, you mostly gain your citizenship through your mother, if your mother is Finnish, or you can also get it through your father with some caveats. For example, if the father has to be married to the child's mother, and or the paternity of the child has to be at least established. And thirdly is the same as number 2, but basically just has the same provisions, but in cases where if the father happens to be deceased. So mainly it is passed on through. In most cases in Finland, it is passed through birth. However, in some cases, the jus soli, aka granting citizenship by birth and territory, can also be observed. These are mostly cases where you try to prevent children to become stateless. So, for example, cases where a child is born and does not acquire the citizenship automatically, or doesn't even have a secondary right to acquire the citizenship of any foreign state, or in cases where child's parents are refugees and they cannot turn to the authorities of their their country of origin, or foundlings where the parents are just simply unknown, or children born in Finland to parents whose citizenship is unknown. So in all those cases when it cannot be established that where it cannot be clearly defined, a person can be granted Finnish citizenship.
Just a gentle time reminder for you, maybe 3-4 minutes, if you can.
Okay, then I will. Okay,
thank you.
Then I'll jump a few slides. This was a citizenship declaration, which basically has to do with former Finnish citizens, and I'll move on to the actual conditions. So conditions required for Finnish citizenship are period of residence, language, good conduct, reliable source of income, and established identity. Firstly, period of residence. 5 years is without interruption if the person has stayed without interruption in Finland, or 7 years if there have been gaps in their stay in Finland. The total amount of years has to be then 7 years. Then there are certain groups which have some exceptions, such as refugees, spouses of Finnish citizens, and Nordic citizens, and former Finnish citizens. Language is one of the main requirements, and as Norma mentioned, in many other member states, also in Finland, it's B1, so Finnish, or you have to be able to oral and written Finnish, Swedish, or either of those languages, sign language. And there's a variety of documents or certificates which are listed in the Nationality Act where you can prove this. And then there are some exceptions where people can, if you are illiterate and you can prove it, or if you are elderly and you have a refugee background, or if there are health reasons. But like I said, these exceptions are very rarely made. Good conduct, this has to do basically with crime. People should not have committed crimes, or they should have restraining orders. Of course, if you have a speeding ticket, for example, then that might not prevent you from getting citizenship. But there's an overall assessment of the person's criminal record, and the general situation is, the general crime record is reviewed. And there are a few crimes such as sexual offenses and homicide, which of course do never expire, so those can always affect your citizenship. And then there's unpaid fees such as fines, taxes, or even student debt sometimes, in some cases, which might affect your might affect their application. Then there's income. A person has to have a list of have to prove their income of a period of their sources of income for the whole period of residence. This can be anything from employment to even grants or benefits from the state. These are actually connected to the period of residence requirement. So basically, it's a way to prove that a person has stayed in Finland for the minimum amount of period. And economic activity is a way to do that. Established identity is the most important, one of the most important ones. This is basically where a person, where the Finnish immigration goes through a person's immigration history and sees if there's any inconsistencies in their personal data, and also if the person has to be able to prove their identity either with a valid identity document or other means, such as date of birth, like giving consistent data on their personal data, date of birth, citizenship, family relations, etc. And this is this has been a consistent issue with, unfortunately, with processing applications, such as lack of documents, falsified documents, and inconsistent data. So those are the main ones. Here's a list of the top 5 from 2018 statistics, which was available at the time. So number 1 is language skills, and number 2 is identity. Those are the main issues, which are usually where people are given refusals for applications.
Just
and
reminding of the time. Sorry.
Okay, just thank you. I'll just a couple of minutes. I'll be. And then just quickly on dual citizenship. Since 2013, dual citizenship has been possible. And the aims will mostly have to do with facilitating people who live abroad to remain connected to Finland, Finnish people, and then encourage foreigners living in Finland. And there are some, like I mentioned earlier, there are nowadays some restrictions also on dual citizens, mostly to do with military and border guard. Citizenship and integration. Generally, the Finnish authorities in our study said that, from our study, revealed that it's been considered a step in the integration process, but it has not been mentioned very often in the government proposal lately. And generally, there has been very little research on the topic. And also, our EMN study mentioned that, found out that there's actually, unfortunately, very little targeted support given to new citizens in Finland. And acquiring citizenship in Finland is actually a fairly simple process. You acquire citizenship and you receive a short letter where it's just a couple of sentences saying that you have been granted citizenship. And there are no ceremonies or you are not demand to pledge allegiance to the Finnish state as such. So support measures and perks, there are some remain mostly local. Some cities have organized ceremonies, but on a national level, there are very few support mechanisms. And that is it. Thank you. Sorry for the time, but thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Tuukka. Don't go yet. We also have one question for you. But thank you for the very informative and succinct overview of the situation and recent developments in Finland. But the question is actually quite detailed and is referring back to one of your slides, I believe.
Okay.
And it asks about what are the reasons that applications submitted by Iraqis and Somalis are with so low approval rate? Is there a common theme or reason why that occurs?
Yeah, sure. In those cases, very often the issues have to do either with inadequate documents regarding identity. Of course, both countries have had issues in issuing reliable identity documents. So sometimes the issues have to do with that, or it has to do with language skills. So the especially in some cases, the people who arrive to Finland may have very little educational background or schooling, so they are often effectively illiterate, and even though they have, of course, in many cases they have tried, they might not have been able to receive the Finnish language certificate, so they apply for the exception for the language requirements. But in order to be able to get that or be exempted from that requirement, they would have to prove that they are illiterate. And sometimes, in many cases, it's not clear whether the person is fully illiterate or not. So these are like typical cases.
Excellent. Thank you very much again, Tuukka, and have a nice rest of the day in Finland.
Thank you.
Ja kes meiega vahepeal liitunud on, eriti livestreami silmas pidades, siis olete sattunud Euroopa rändevõrgustiku Eesti kontaktpunkti konverentsile Kodakondsus ja ränne täna ja homme. Peaaegu isegi riimub. Tuletan veel kord ka meelde kõigile osalejatele, nii virtuaalsetele kui füüsiliselt kohapeal olevatele, et meil on avatud slido.com ehk siis slido.com veebikeskkonnas võimalus esitada ettekandjatele küsimusi. Selleks tuleb minna sellele aadressile ja sisestada ürituse koodina sõna citizenship. Ja ootame küsimusi siis terve meie ürituse vältel. Järgmine esineja teeb meile e-ettekande ei kusagilt mujalt kui mitme maa ja mere tagant Iirimaalt. Sarah Cork on Euroopa rändevõrgustiku Iiri kontaktpunkti analüütik. Sarah on olnud kaasautor teadusuuringutes, mis puudutavad lasterännet, varjupaiga õigust, migrantide integratsiooni ja diskrimineerimist Iirimaal. Good morning, Sarah. I read that you had a bank holiday in Ireland yesterday. I hope you have recovered from it.
Yes, almost there.
I'm delighted to give you the air now for the next 15 to 20 minutes. The air is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone there. I'm just putting my slides on the screen. Can you see the slides?
Almost. We can see the PowerPoint view. If you could put it in a present mode would be excellent.
Okay.
All good now.
Okay. So thank you, everyone, and thank you particularly to the Estonian National Contact Point for inviting me to speak at today's conference. It's a privilege to be able to join you virtually from my home here in Ireland, although I am sad I can't be there in person to join you all. So as was mentioned, I am working with the National Contact Point of Ireland, which is based in the Economic and Social Research Institute in Dublin. And today I'd like to present some information on the Irish contribution to the EMN study that Norma presented earlier. And we focused our study in Ireland on the naturalisation process for migrants to acquire citizenship. So in my presentation, I will present firstly some data on naturalisation in Ireland. I'll then provide an overview of the conditions required to become an Irish citizen, as well as some information on the processing of applications and citizenship ceremonies and what these look like in the Irish. So firstly, on this chart shows the number of people that were granted Irish citizenship through naturalisation over the past 10 years. So you can see that from 2008, Ireland saw a substantial increase over time in the number of people that acquired citizenship through naturalisation. And this was in large part due to the fact that in the early 2000s, Ireland experienced an unprecedented increase in immigration, having previously been a country of emigration. And this led to a corresponding growth in the number of people who subsequently became eligible for citizenship in the late 2000s. So the number of people had increased from 4,000 in 2008 to over 25,000 by 2012. And the increase in applications in these early years had led to a significant backlog. So the Department of Justice in Ireland put in place processing improvements to deal with the rise in applications. So you can see that in 2012 and 2013, a large number of the backlog was processed and people were granted citizenship in these years. So since 2012 then, there has been a gradual decline in the number of people naturalising in Ireland. So in 2018, only 8,000 people were granted Irish citizenship through naturalisation. So in terms of nationality then, as with the EU average, the majority of migrants becoming Irish citizens through naturalisation are nationals of non-EU countries. And the most common nationalities are Nigeria, India, the Philippines, Pakistan, the US, and China. And in line with overall EU trends, we see a decrease in non-EU nationals acquiring citizenship in the last few years. However, what's interesting in the Irish context is that while we have relatively lower number of EU nationals becoming Irish citizens, here you can see in the dark blue, they're actually increasing. So while the overall numbers of people becoming Irish citizens has decreased in recent years, the number of EU nationals naturalising are gaining in number. And the most common EU nationalities that become Irish citizens in Ireland are Poland, Romania, the UK, Latvia, Hungary, and Lithuania. What is particularly of interest to this audience, and particularly in light of the next speaker, is that the number of UK nationals in particular has significantly increased in recent years in acquiring Irish citizenship. So you can see in 2018, 687 UK nationals became Irish citizens, in contrast to 2016, when only 98 UK nationals became Irish citizens. And this represents a 7-fold increase since 2016. You can see the proportion of UK nationals as well has increased. So in 2014, UK nationals represented less than 1% of the total number of people naturalising in Ireland. And this had increased to 8% by 2018. Now, just to note for context that this is only a small part of the picture of the citizenship acquisition by UK nationals since the vote to leave the European Union in 2016 took place. This data only presents naturalisation figures because the study only focuses on naturalisation, and a much greater number of UK nationals become Irish citizens through descent, so through their parent or grandparent. But like these figures, there has been a significant increase in the number of people from the UK who are claiming their entitlement to citizenship through descent. So moving to the policy framework then on naturalisation. So as I said at the start, naturalisation is the primary means of through which a migrant can acquire citizenship and establish their permanent residence in Ireland. We don't have a statutory long-term residence scheme in Ireland like in most other EU member states. So naturalisation really is the primary way in which a migrant can secure their residence permanently in Ireland. So the current naturalisation framework dates back to the 1956 Act, and this contains 5 key conditions to become an Irish citizen through naturalisation. So firstly, the applicant must be 18 years of age, or they can be a child born in Ireland and their parent can make the application on their behalf. Secondly, they must be of good character. They must also have 5 years of residence in Ireland before applying to be a citizen. They must sign a declaration to say that they intend to continue to reside in Ireland once they become a citizen. And lastly, they must declare fidelity to the state and undertake to observe the Irish laws and democratic values. So I think what's important to note as well, in contrast to other member states, as Norma described, it is the Minister for Justice, or it is the Department of Justice who take the application for naturalisation and make the decision. So the decision is made, a recommendation is made by the Department of Justice, and it's the Minister for Justice who decides on the application. So it's a horizontal sort of decision-making process. So the Minister for Justice has discretion to grant naturalisation. So what this means is that citizenship is a privilege and an honour rather than a right or entitlement. Now, in some cases, the Minister may waive the conditions for some groups. So if the applicant is a refugee or a stateless person, or a child of a naturalized parent, the conditions can be waived. So in practice, what usually happens is the minister will grant naturalization after 3 years instead of 5 years residence for these groups. So then, just to provide some specific detail on the conditions I outlined. So as I mentioned, applicants must have 5 years of residence. And in law, this is 3 years. So for people who are married to an Irish citizen or who are the civil partners of an Irish citizen. Some residence permissions are not counted or cannot be reckonable for the purpose of citizenship. So if you are residing without a legal residence permission, if you are a student, or if you are an asylum seeker, the time you spend with these statuses do not count towards the minimum required period. Now, if you're recognised as a refugee, the time you have spent as an asylum applicant does count. The final year then for applicants of the 5-year requirement must be continuous. However, in practice, applicants can leave Ireland for up to 6 weeks for short-term absences. Now, last year in 2019, what continuous meant in the Irish context was brought into debate in a case called Jones versus Minister for Justice and Equality. So the courts handed down a decision in the High Court that continuous residence must mean that an applicant cannot leave the Irish state at all in their year prior to applying for citizenship. And this caused much concern among applicants and led to the processing of applications being put on hold for a number of months. However, ultimately, the Court of Appeal in Ireland overturned the judgment and ruled that it was not workable to have a rule that requires an applicant not to leave the country in the year prior to their application. So in practice, we still have this 6-week rule that is applied by the department. However, in certain cases, some practitioners and NGOs that represent citizenship applicants have highlighted this rule can be restrictive, particularly for people who regularly travel for the purpose of work or for family reasons. And it's not clear to what extent exemptions from the 6-week rule might apply to these groups of people. So moving then to the good character requirement. So as in other member states, Ireland requires either good conduct or character to be satisfied. But what this means in the Irish context is not defined in law or in policy, and there's no guidance provided to applicants on what they need to do or what they need to show to meet this requirement. In the application form, applicants must supply details on any convictions they have in the state, if they've been the subject of a police investigation or if they've been involved in crimes such as war crimes, etc. Then once the application is submitted, the Department of Justice will obtain information from the Irish police to assess if the applicant has a criminal record. Now, failure to satisfy the good character requirement is among the top reasons for refusals in Ireland. So this brings into stark, focus the fact that, there is a lack of guidance for candidates there. So this is a particular issue that's currently debated. In terms then of other requirements, I wanted to provide a comparison with other EU member states to highlight requirements that are not in place in Ireland. So, for example, in Ireland, there is no economic requirement. So an applicant does not need to demonstrate that they have a minimum level of income. At the same time, applicants must show proof that they have a source of income or what type of social welfare they receive. There's also no requirement to renounce the applicant's previous citizenship. So dual citizenship is permitted in Ireland. And lastly, as Norma mentioned, Ireland does not require applicants to demonstrate language proficiency. We also don't require applicants to demonstrate knowledge of Irish society or an integration test. However, what's perhaps interesting is that the Irish government, as part of the migrant integration strategy that was adopted in 2017, have committed to examining whether they should introduce these requirements and what the benefits might be of having these requirements in place. So turning then to naturalization, the naturalization process. Applications for naturalization are currently paper-based and are submitted via post to the Department of Justice. As Norma mentioned, Ireland is one of the few member states that are examining the introduction of online forms in the future. Naturalization applicants must also pay a fee, an application fee, and if they're successful, they must pay a certification fee to receive the certificate. And the certificate fee can be reduced in certain cases. So for children, it's reduced to €200, and that the fee is actually waived for refugees and stateless people. So I think in an EU context, the overall fee, and in addition to fees that applicants might need to pay for securing documentation and certifying documentation, these fees are quite high in an EU context. However, the Irish Department of Justice has highlighted that fees reflect the costs involved in processing applications, as well as the fact that they do keep the cost of fees under review to see whether the fees might deter people from applying for citizenship. In terms of processing times then, lastly, there are no limits set out in Irish law as to the amount of time in which an application must be processed by the department. However, in practice, the department reports that in recent years, the average processing time for a standard application is 6 months. Now, in the last year, this has increased to 12 months for standard applications, particularly in light of the fact that restrictions have been put in place to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, prior to the pandemic and this year, NGOs in Ireland, non-governmental organisations who represent citizenship applicants have highlighted that some applicants experience significant delays, and this can be up to 1 or 2 years or more in some cases. And this is an issue that has been raised quite frequently in the media and in the Irish Parliament as well. So the last slide I wanted to discuss with you today was the citizenship ceremonies that take place in Ireland. And these were introduced in 2011 at the time when Ireland had received a significant number of applications, and more people were becoming Irish citizens through the naturalisation process. And the citizenship ceremonies were introduced to give recognition to the importance of citizenship and to mark the acquisition of citizenship with a sense of occasion. And the ceremonies have been welcomed across the general public, across applicants and non-governmental organisations as a positive development in Ireland. And I think the introduction of ceremonies has really raised awareness of the naturalisation process among the general public as well. So the citizenship ceremony itself is actually a mandatory final step in the naturalisation process. So all applicants must attend before they can become an Irish citizen. They also must make the declaration of fidelity to the state at the ceremony, and they'll then receive their certificate of naturalisation once they make the declaration. At the ceremony itself, an information booklet is also provided to applicants, providing information on the right to vote and how to apply for a passport. Now, in the past few months, of course, ceremonies have not been able to take place due to restrictions in light of COVID-19. And the government actually announced just last Friday that ceremonies will be temporarily replaced by a paper-based declaration over the post. So applicants can post a declaration to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice will send out their application or their certificate of naturalisation to confirm that they have become an Irish citizen. And this was to ensure that there are no further delays in the processing of applications by eligible citizens. So just to wrap up the presentation, As I mentioned at the beginning, there has been an overall decrease in people acquiring Irish citizen after a period of significant increase in applications. So we've seen that EU nationals are increasing in recent years. I think when on paper, at least, Ireland has comparatively favourable conditions for naturalisation in Ireland than in some other EU member states. Ireland views citizenship as a means to further integration, not only the final, citizenship being the final step in the integration process. So we don't require citizen or applicants to satisfy integration requirements, etc. We also allow dual citizenship, as I've mentioned. Now, despite this, applicants do face a number of challenges in applying for naturalisation, as I've mentioned. So the lack of guidance on permitted absences from the state, as well as the good character requirement, as well as processing times, which have been further exacerbated by the current pandemic situation. So I think I'll leave it there. I hope this gives you a broad overview of the approach to naturalisation in Ireland and some of the challenges we're experiencing. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Sarah, like the Irish say, thanks a million from your contribution from across the seas from the Republic of Ireland. There is one question for you, if you can just stay with us for a moment longer.
Yes.
And the question asks, could it be stated that if the requirement to be of good character would be defined, then more applicants would acquire citizenship through naturalization in the Republic of Ireland?
Yes, so this is a concern that non-governmental organisations have raised, that there is a need for further guidance on how the good character requirement is interpreted by the Department of Justice. So we see, for example, in the UK, they have a handbook which is publicly available to applicants and sets out the type of factors that should be considered by the Home Office. So while there haven't been similar guidance in Ireland, there has been a number of cases in the Irish courts, and so some judgments have provided guidance to legal practitioners and applicants on the type of factors that the courts consider must be included in order for the process to be fair and proportionate. So to a certain extent, some guidance has been provided by the courts. Now, as I said, the interpretation of good character is at the discretion of the Irish Minister for Justice. So taking that into account, any factors that are listed, they cannot be exhaustive. But I think what is being proposed by practitioners on the ground is this need for further guidance, particularly as it is, as I've mentioned, it is a requirement that leads to some refusals as reported by the department.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and have a nice rest of the morning for you, because it's 2 hours earlier in Ireland than in Estonia.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Kes meiega äsja liitunud on veebi vahendusel, siis meeldetuletuseks, kus te olete sattunud Euroopa rändevõrgustiku Eesti kontaktpunkti konverentsile kodakondsus ja ränne täna ja homme. Meil on 2 live streami, üks on originaalkeeles ehk siis nendes keeltes, milles ettekanded toimuvad, inglise ja eesti on nendeks keelteks, ja teine live streami link YouTube'is on selline, kus siis kogu sisu edastatakse ainult inglise keeles. Meie ingliskeelse ja esimese paneeli lõppakordiks on natukene teistsugune teema, mis loomulikult seondub kogu meie konverentsi ja ka eelnevate ettekandjate temaatikaga, aga ta on kohe eriliselt aktuaalsel ning põneval teemal, milleks on Brexiti mõju Suurbritannia kodakondsuse väärtusele. Ettekandeks annan hetke pärast sõna Piret Kuusikule, kes on Eesti Välispoliitika Instituudi nooremteadur. Pireti uurimisvaldkondadeks on Euroopa Liidu välis- ja kaitsepoliitika, Brexit, Saksa-Prantsuse koostöö ning Põhjala-Balti regiooni roll Euroopas ja maailmas. palun, Piret, nüüd lõpuks saan ma siiski ka öelda, et lava või siis õigemini pult on sinu.
Okay, suur aitäh. Sorry, I was supposed to speak in English. Right. So when I saw that I am going to be the last one giving the presentation, I kind of, it's always a dread because you know that people have been listening to those presentations and you kind of know that, you know, I've been in the audience as well, that by the end of it you get quite bored and are thinking about coffee more than actually the presentation. So I thought, how could I make it a tad more fun than the usual one? Okay, I can see the slides from there. And for that purpose, I decided to use a book that is called How to Be a Brit. It is written by George Mikes, who was a Hungarian journalist and who became naturalized British citizen in 1946. And so most of the illustrations and some of the comments are from this book. I hope they make it a lively one indeed. So, let's see whether it works. Great. So to start off, I think if we talk about Britain, then it is very important to understand that it is tad different than we understand in Estonia. If you have an Estonian citizenship in Estonia, then most likely you also identify yourself as an Estonian. However, in the UK, it is tad more complicated. And here is a kind of a small part from George Mikes' book. I know a naturalized Britisher who, talking to a young man, repeatedly used the phrase, "We the Englishmen." The young man looked at him, took his pipe out of his mouth and remarked softly, "Sorry, sir, I'm a Welshman," turned his back on him and walked away. And what I mean by that is that when we talk about British citizenship, then within that citizenship, there are actually 4 different nations. There are Englishmen, there are Scotsmen, there's Northern Ireland, men and women, and there are Welshmen. And as George Mike says, you can become British, but you will never become English. And I do strongly suggest to keep that in mind when going in Britain, because you will offend people if you call the Scottish man an English man. But Britain is not only the island in Europe and a tiny part of another island. It also has its history, and as we here in Estonia know that you can't escape your history at all. So the imperial legacy still lives with the UK, and that also in their citizenship and in kind of and also in the story of immigration. And what you can see here is that today you can find people who have gained their kind of status as a British citizen or some kind of relation through 6 different types of, essentially through 6 different routes, I guess, is the best way to characterize it, of which 2 today are active. So you either become a British citizen, or you have 10,000 people who are also considered the British overseas territory citizens, who are people who live or lived in the former colonies and somehow are connected to the UK. They own a British passport, but then most of them don't actually have the right to reside in the UK. And I think that these 6 types and the remaining 2 actually, I think, take quite well together the whole course of immigration and gaining access to British citizenship over the last century. And it shows that access has become more narrow and narrower. And I argue in my presentation that Brexit is making it also that the access even more narrower. But that all to say, don't worry if you can't really see the details of these graphs, but the first one shows the kind of the ethnic groups and how they've grown between the 2001 and 2011. My apologies for such a kind of old data, but the census was in 2011, and the new one hasn't come up yet. So you are in this kind of the victim of times. And what you can see that over those 10 years, all ethnicities in the UK have been rising. Most notably, the white, other whites, which mostly is the Europeans, and then the graph on your right side then shows the top 10 countries where people who living in the UK are from, and you can see that there's mostly the highest number or the highest increase has been among Indians. Then you have the Polish, Pakistani, and so on and so forth. But the fundamental point of this slide is to say that the UK is an incredibly diverse society. And though immigrants consist only, if I'm not wrong, 4%, then the ethnic makeup of the UK is very diverse and colourful. And that, I personally think, has led to this political question, and I think that many countries in Europe, but not only in Europe, also the rest of the world, are faced with this question: which kind of a country we want. So on your right, so in my left, you see a man in this top hat, the idealized version of British society that we think of. When I went to university in the UK, I thought that this is almost how life is going to be like. And on your right side, you see this much more diverse makeup of the British society that is much more globalized and also follows a fairly different lifestyle than the one on your right. And I think if you look at the political discourse today in the UK, you see to some extent those contrasting visions. And it is only how can I say, it is how it is in the rest of the Europe and in other places as well, that the more diverse version of the country or the society is represented by people who live in big cities, who actually live together with ethnic minorities and migrants, and the more traditional view on how to go forward into the future is represented by people who live in the countryside that tend to be more homogeneous in their makeup. And the way that contrasting visions, I think, has played out into the British discourse is that immigration has become a terribly politicized issue. I think that the spark was given by, and not only I think that, but the spark was given by 2004 EU enlargement, where you saw a large number of countries joining the European Union and people gaining access to one of the 4 freedoms of the European Union, the free movement of people. And the UK was one of the desired destinations for people from Central and Eastern Europe. And then in 2010, you see the first time the Conservative Party's public manifesto for the elections says that we need to become much more stronger and much more stricter on immigration. And then it's tad infamous the time when Theresa May was a Home Secretary at the Home Office. So that's from 2010 to 2016. And there you very much saw how the Home Office changed and has changed into what it is today. So in 2012, they introduced this idea of a hostile environment for immigrants and migrants. And the idea was there that essentially, let's make the conditions such that people would leave voluntarily. That meant that they started to, access to services started to be limited. There were letters that people gained that you will be deported, and this and the deportations themselves tend to be, they're not to be particularly nice, let's say. And I think that the further stress, and just to point out, there's a picture with the slogan that is a quote from Theresa May that said that we can deport first and hear appeals later. And that is the attitude, I think that kind of illustrates very well the attitude of a hostile environment, where it really is that, just go away and essentially rest. We don't essentially care about anything else, essentially. And the further stress was put on then on the European refugee and migrant crisis in 2015, where though the UK wasn't particularly, let's say, touched by it as such, because it is an island. You do have to actually cross waters to get to the UK. And UK was not particularly keen on taking on the refugees, but nevertheless, the pictures of chaos in Europe did kind of spoke to the British public. And so what you saw here is that immigration really became one of those top issues for British people living in the UK when thinking about their society. And you can see here that dark line is the rise of where people considered immigration the most important topic. And you can really see the spike in 2015 at the time of the European refugee crisis. And then after that, it started to decrease. And then with the Brexit vote, it has basically become one of the minor issues. And so, what is it with this Brexit? There are people who argue that Brexit is a result of this politicization of immigration. To some extent, I agree. I think Brexit is a very complicated issue where immigration plays a very big part, but there are also other reasons that led to this development. Today, we are in the situation where the UK has left the European Union at the beginning of this year. The transition period will end by the end of this year. And so essentially what we'll have next year is an entirely different story with the UK, or the kind of in the UK-EU relationship. And one of when we talk about the immigration in that debate, the kind of the central, the driving argument there was that uncontrolled immigration is an issue. And I think it was very interesting where people mostly were, okay, like immigrants, if you ask them, okay, are immigrants good for the society? Yes, they understand the economics of it. They understand that we need them. But the fact that the UK government doesn't have a control over how many people and who comes to the Britain kind of seemed to me that central issue. And that also gave the way to the vote leave slogan, take back control. And here I think the kind of the peak of it really was the low-skilled seasonal workforce who tends to actually live in the kind of the countryside of the UK. And yes, there are Polish and Romanians and Bulgarians in London as well, but London is already so diverse and mixed that it doesn't really kind of come so much to the fore. But when you are somewhere in the in Northern England, and you have this, let's say in our cases, like a Turi-like place, and then suddenly you have 2-3 streets where there's only Polish people living, it does kind of, it contrasts very well, and the change itself is very visible. And that was something that the voters pointed out in many of the interviews, if you look back to that time. And as I said, Brexit is a complicated issue, and that change happened actually in a time where those same areas in the countryside have seen a decay of how can I say, socio-economic conditions. The financial crisis of the past decade really hit hard the countryside and the services and the life there. Well, I studied at York. York is a lovely town, absolutely super cute, exactly what you see in Midsummer Murders. And now when I went back a couple of years ago, you have streets that used to be bustling with small businesses are today you see to rent. I think now, due to COVID, the things are even more dire. So you can't take out the economic or socio-economic change happening at large as well. Due to the withdrawal agreement, it was agreed that EU citizens will get the right to stay in the UK. Most of them I know, the statistic says that most of them do now have their papers in orders. There have been some prominent cases where people who've been married and lived in the UK for 30 years and then suddenly they were denied the settled status, but in most cases it seems that going public and going to the kind of, how can I say, going to ask help from the newspapers and making things public has solved the issues. At least I'm not aware of this kind of long-standing dispute between the Home Office and EU citizens. And as said, migration to the EU has decreased since 2015. But as I also pointed out at the beginning, oopsie daisies, the imperial legacy hasn't gone anywhere from the UK, and what you saw in 2018 was the so-called Windrush scandal. So in 1948, the UK, ravaged by the World War II, decided to allow people who have been born in British colonies to come to the UK and essentially work for the UK's economy. And those people, roughly 500,000 people came. What happened was that many of them were kids. The documentation ended up being very messy, and many of those people didn't have documents, and what came out, many of them didn't have even passports because they were did not have over the past, almost 70 years soon, didn't really have the means to go and travel, and so they never needed a passport. And with the hostile environment policy, you started to see cases where those people who essentially came to the UK knowing that they have the right to stay in the UK for long periods of time, that they started to also get letters to, letters saying that you will be deported very soon or you're illegal in this country. And up to 2018, when again the scandal broke, and you saw both parliamentarians and many NGO groups coming out for the Windrush generation and telling like this is not fair what is going on. These people came to the UK with the promise that they can stay, and now they're being, and most of them are quite old, to be honest. So and you had these very personal stories of people being nurses and teachers and contributing to the British society, and then suddenly they are said that you can't be here anymore and go back to a country which many of them hadn't lived for a very long time or didn't even know anything about it. But what I think it brought out was a very fine line in the British society, where on the one hand you have this, to some extent, anti-immigrant tones, but then at the same time the attitude how the British government, the hostile environment policy is not really okay. People are not okay that even if you're illegal here, then you will be treated so meanly, let's say. So I'll just finish up on some notes on the post-Brexit Britain. So right now the Johnson government is very keen on the idea of having a points-based system, on the example of Australia, and it's all about skills, skills, skills. So essentially the idea is to give access to people who have skills and higher education, and those seasonal agriculture sector workers, there are schemes for it, but essentially the hope is that by pushing that workforce or that immigration out, the pay for in the sector will rise, and then people who live already in Britain would like to then go into and work in these areas. But migration also is becoming part of British foreign policy. This July, when the Chinese state China put down its very stringent laws in Hong Kong. For instance, the UK offered 3 million people the right to come and reside in the UK, as Hong Kong is also one of the former territories of the UK. And also, one of the promises of the Johnson government is that, now when we're free, we can do all the trade deals and so on and so forth. But when Theresa May went to the Indians about it back then, the first thing that the Indian government asked was greater access to their people. And that's not really what the UK wants to give. So quite complicated. Will migration curb, yes or no? I don't know that. There are arguments for both sides, but fundamentally the whole Brexit case is about control, and you can see that now when people feel that that the government has the control, then it's not so much of a big issue anymore. We heard long about how to get British citizenship. It's quite similar to the other cases. And I will just finish up with George Michael saying, if you do become naturalised and gain a British citizenship, you must start eating porridge, speak English only with your former compatriots, revise your library, get books on life and thoughts of a Scottish Salmon, for instance, instead of a Proust, and speak to your new compatriots only using the term we. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Piret, for your lovely presentation in lovely British, or shall I say York English. It was a pleasure to hear, especially given the topic. And we also have one question for you.
Sure.
You mentioned, obviously, also in your presentation that uncontrolled immigration, or at least the perception of it, and the desire to take back control, in inverted commas, was a central issue in Brexit campaign. How do you feel, or does the public feel that the uncontrolled immigration is less of an issue now, given that we are almost in the post-Brexit period, or approaching it?
I think so, and I also kind of brought out this graph that showed that immigration is not really an issue per se, and people started to worry about other things, so whatever these might be. But I think the UK, its story with, I am pro-European, but that does not mean that I see problems with the free movement of peoples. And I think the UK is an especially dire example on how it kind of went wrong. And so in that sense, I think there are lessons to be taken, and I hope we take them.
Thank you very much. Piret? Ja.
Stuff. Thank you.
Nüüd on aeg siis sealmaal, et me läheme väikesele virgutus- ja mõttepausile. Oleme tagasi täpselt 15 minuti pärast. Teeme siis 16, ehk siis 12:10 Eesti aja järgi. Tere tulemast tagasi, head inimesed ja kes teab, võib-olla ka robotid ja lihtsalt botid, kes meid jälgivad. Meeldetuletuseks siis, et käimas on Euroopa rändevõrgustiku Eesti kontaktpunkti konverents Kodakondsus ja ränne täna ja homme. Algamas on teine paneel ja konverents jätkuvalt sama, ei ole vahepeal digi muutunud, seega jätkame ka selle sama olulise teemaga. Meie tänase sündmuse teises paneelis keskenduma Eesti kodakondsuspoliitika valikutele. Esimesena on mul hea meel sõna anda Rutt Annusele, kes on Eesti Vabariigi Siseministeeriumi kodakondsus- ja rändepoliitika osakonna juhataja. Rutil on pikaajaline kogemus kodakondsus, migratsiooni ja identiteedihalduspoliitika kujundamisel ning juhtimisel Eestis ning samuti õpetab ta Tallinna Ülikoolis rahvusvahelise ja Euroopa Liidu migratsiooniõigust. Palun!
Tere! Mul on väga hea meel teha väike ülevaade siis Eesti Vabariigi kodakondsuspoliitikast. Ja ma väga palju ajaloolisel siis käsitlusel ei peatu, aga räägin siis, millised on olnud läbi aegade Eesti kodakondsuspoliitika valikud, millised on olnud erinevate valikute järelmid ja kuhu me siis teel oleme. Kõigepealt siis on oluline raamistik antud meie põhiseaduses, et Eesti Vabariigi põhiseaduse kohaselt omandab siis laps Eesti kodakondsuse oma vanema järgi. Ehk kui vähemalt üks vanem on lapse sünnihetkel Eesti kodanik, siis on laps sünnijärgne Eesti kodanik. Sõltumata sellest, kas siis vanemad seda tahavad või kas laps seda ise hiljem elu jooksul tahab. Ja väga paigas on meil olnud algusest peale ka põhimõte, et need, kes ei omanda kodakondsust sünniga, need saavad siis Eesti kodakondsust taotleda. Ja olulised kriteeriumid on siis riigikeele oskus ja siis tuleb anda ka lojaalsusvanne. Samuti peab olema siis välismaalane elanud Eestis vähemalt 8 aastat, mis on siis ühtepidi piisav aeg, et ta suudaks siis juba orienteeruda ühiskonnas ja suudaks täita siis oma kodaniku ülesandeid ehk siis tegutseda avalikes huvides, kogu ühiskonna huvides. Kui rääkida Eesti kodakondsuspoliitikast Eesti Vabariigi iseseisvuse taastamise järel, siis kõigepealt tuli teha väga põhimõtteline otsus, et millised inimesed siis lugeda Eesti kodanikeks ja millised mitte. Sest paraku 50 aastat Nõukogude okupatsiooni oli andnud meile siis tagajärje, et meil oli siin ligi 500 000 inimest, kes ei olnud Eesti kodanikud. Ja loomulikult hästi põhimõtteline esimene otsustuskoht oligi see, et kui suur on siis nende inimeste otsustusõigus selle üle, milliste reeglite järgi siis Eestis elatakse. Ja kodakondsuspoliitika kujundamisel on kogu aeg lähtutud arusaamast, et kodanikud on need inimesed, kes kujundavad õigusruumi. Ehk siis teadaolevalt käib see meil esindusdemokraatia korras. Eesti kodanikud on need, kes valivad Riigikogu ja Riigikogu pädevuses on siis võtta vastu seadusi ja seaduse muudatusi. Ja teistpidi on Kodakondsus- ja Migratsiooniamet ja hiljem siis Politsei- ja Piirivalveamet on väga, ütleme siis, ka kodakondsuspoliitika rakendamisel olnud väga konservatiivse joonega, seda loomulikult Siseministeeriumi ja Vabariigi Valitsuse heakskiidul. Ja tegelikkuses on siis meie kodakondsuspoliitika olnud suhteliselt vähe muutumises. Hästi põhimõtteline otsus oli siis jõustada 26. veebruaril 1992 siis 38. aasta kodakondsusseadus. Ja siis oli võimalik muidugi ka rakendada seda selliselt, et need normid, mis olid oma aja ära elanud, tunnistada siis edasiulatuvalt kehtetuks. Näiteks säte, et naine omandas siis Eesti kodakondsuse abiellumise mitmikkodakondsusest. Märgilise tähendusega teema, mis kodakondsuspoliitika kujundamisel läbi aastate oli üles kerkinud, oli siis see, et mida teha siis määratlemata kodakondsusega välismaalaste lastega, kes on sündinud ja kasvanud Eestis. ja poliitiliste arutelude tulemusena otsustati siis 1999. aastal siis jõustada seadusemuudatus, kus vanemad, kes ei ole ühegi riigi kodanikud ja on elanud Eestis seaduslikult vähemalt 5 aastat, saavad taotleda oma lastele, kes siis samuti ei ole ühegi riigi kodanikud, Eesti kodakondsust ilma täiendavate tingimusteta. Ja see oli tõepoolest omal ajal väga olulise poliitilise debati küsimus, sest ühtepidi on ju eesmärk ära hoida siis sisuliselt kodakondsusetuse taastootmist, mida me oleme maailmas küll ja küll näinud. Ja teistpidi siis 1. jaanuaril 2016 jõustus seadusemuudatus, kus kogu see protsess pöörati teisipidi. Ehk siis selle asemel, et vanemad taotleksid lapsele kodakondsust, omandasid siis need lapsed sünnihetkest küll naturalisatsiooni korras Eesti kodakondsuse ja vanematel tekkis siis võimalus 1 aasta jooksul sellest kodakondsusest loobuda. Kusjuures lastel on siis täisealiseks saades võimalus oma Eesti kodakondsust taastada. Sellest ajast peale sai siis ka, ütleme, selle teema poliitilised valikud sisuliselt läbi ja lõppes ära ka määratlemata kodakondsusega laste nii-öelda siis ütleme probleem ja kodakondsusetuse sisuliselt taastootmine. Loobujaid on olnud väga üksikuid. Mis omakorda tähendab seda, et määratlemata kodakondsusega inimesed on valdavalt siis ütleme vanemad põlvkonnad ja tõepoolest mingisugusel hetkel laheneb see probleem ise, kas need inimesed võtavad Eesti kodakondsuse, paraku kõige suurem määratlemata kodakondsusega isikute vähenemise põhjus on surm ja mõned võtavad ka muu riigi kodakondsuse. Üks hästi põhimõtteline teema, mis on läbi aegade üles kerkinud, on küsimus, et kui riik on määratlenud inimese Eesti kodanikuna ilma, et inimene ise oleks seda mingilgi viisil põhjustanud, siis järgneb sellele äärmiselt põhimõtteline küsimus. Kas siis tuleb õiguslik ja faktiline olukord viia omavahel kooskõlla selliselt, et inimesest saab uuesti välismaalane või puudub selleks siiski kaalukas avalik huvi? Eesti kodanike määratlemisel, Eesti kodanike passide väljaandmisel 92. ja 93. aastal see valdavalt toimus, oli umbes 1500 inimest, kes määratleti ekslikult Eesti kodanikuna. Ja nende järgi siis omakorda määratleti ka vastavalt siis nende lapsed ja ka varasemalt abikaasad Eesti kodanikena. Ja see küsimus sai mingil määral lahenduse ja poliitilise seisukoha 2003. aastal, kui siis jõustus selline seadusemuudatus, mis võimaldas enne siis praegu kehtiva kodakondsusseaduse muudatuse jõustumist. Praegune seadus jõustus 1. aprillil 1995. aastal. Määratleda nad siis Eesti kodanikena samal alusel, nagu siis riik nad omal ajal ekslikult määratles. Ja 2012. aastal laienes seesama norm sisuliselt ka kehtivale seadusele. Ja nüüd taaskord oleme me siis selle olukorra ees, kus kerkis üles siis Eestisse mitte asunud optantide järeltulijate probleem ja küsimus, et kui riik on määratlenud inimese sünnijärgse Eesti kodanikuna ilma, et inimene oleks seda ise kuidagi põhjustanud, siis mis siis selle inimese õiguslikust staatusest saab? Ka seekord lahenes siis probleem selliselt, et need inimesed, Politsei- ja Piirivalveamet lihtsalt siis luges samal alusel kodakondsuse omandanuks, nagu nad olid siis omal ajal ekslikult määratletud. Ja üha uuesti kerkib.
Pact states that it's not allowed for Estonian citizens to have dual citizenship, neither for the naturalized one nor the ones who are Estonian citizens by birth. We have also Estonian diaspora around the world, the second, third, and soon also the fourth generation of Estonians who have historically been connected to Estonia. And of course, the question arises whether they could at the same time also be citizens of their country of residence. It's a question of political choice, of course, again, but it's very likely that people, Estonians who lived in other countries all over the world, that they also had adopted citizenship of other countries. And it's the citizens who have the right to design the rules of how we live here in Estonia. And then also we could think that people who are not that much anymore connected to Estonia, whether they should have the possibility to be a part of this process, to participate in the elections of the parliament, Riigikogu. And then we also have this question that foreign citizens who move to Estonia, are they expected to apply for Estonian citizenship, or do we expect that they keep their citizenship? So the rules are there, and the rest is a question of political choices. This was a short overview over the choices that Estonia has had. Constantly we have some new bills in the parliament under discussion, both now and it has been so earlier as well. And it's important to continue the discussions about dual citizenship, what the legal consequences are, what the practical consequences are, and what Estonia can afford also from a legal point of view and from the point of view of political choices. Thank you very much, Ruth Annus, and as Ruth is going to participate in the panel discussion later on, and we will leave the questions for later. I'd also like to remind that on www.slido.com and #citizenship, you can all, both the ones who have gathered here in the hall and the ones who are following us over the internet, ask questions from panelists. But even the next speaker is a person who is very much dedicated to this topic. Erkki Koort is working as internal director of Security Institute of Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, and he has also been a part of visa waiver with USA and led the development of MID. And he, Erkki Koort, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this beautiful introduction. And I must say that I have done many of these things together with someone else, for example, with Ruth. But true, I wrote the books myself. As you mentioned, I have written 3 books. But I will speak to you here for a very particular reason. When the Migration Network came over to the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, established its office here, and a couple of months ago we discussed with them about the conference and the program, and the colleagues from Migration Network asked me to make a speech myself. So this is how I ended up here, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for this. I will tell you about the broader vision of citizenship and the ideas that we as a society should really have clear in our minds. And we should find time for these issues without having emotions related to that or having any political turmoil related to that. The options and the choices that come along with it and the risks that we have to assess are some things that Estonia would have to have a clear view of, whether we like it or not. We have to debate on these issues. A state must know who its citizens are. There is no doubt about it, because how else would the state be able to organize everything? And it is clear that the execution of the right to vote and the survival of democracy thereby are extremely vital. In terms of citizenship policies, it is also important for the state to know that some of its citizens are not citizens twice, not in the sense of having a dual citizenship, but rather not being a citizen of the same state twice. So here we refer to the double identities that the world has struggled with. And after the registries have been sorted out, the populations of some countries have declined considerably. Why are double identities being used? Well, people use them for hiding themselves or for having access to some benefits. We know that there was a case in Estonia as well, where a lady had 10 different identities to make pension claims that were fraudulent. And the other thing is that the state should know that whether a citizen of that particular state is also a citizen of another state. Why is that important? 12 years ago, when a person crossed the Estonian border, they actually made use of exiting Estonia by having the Estonian passport and entering the Russian Federation with using the Russian passport, and the border guard at the time did not ask for a visa in the Estonian passport because a Russian Federation passport was submitted to them. But when this matter was brought into attention, we started investigating, and of course in